The following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
And want to thank the great team at the Human Service Council led by Allison Sesso, and to convene and help to convene this really incredible all-star panel that will discuss the findings, hopefully spark some thoughts and future conversations, and come up with some innovative ideas to help maintain the quality of life for all New Yorkers. And we thank the Human Service Council for beginning this discussion, and as I mentioned, to continue the dialogue.
We're pleased today to have a phenomenal panel with great expertise, varying perspectives, and what I'd like to do is get right to the questions for each panelist. When I ask them their question, I'll give a brief background, but Allison and I have encouraged the panelists to engage as much as possible. So the first panelist I'd like to turn to is Steve Banks, who, as many people know, is the Commissioner of the New York City Human Resources Administration. So Steve, what is your perspective on the current approach to designing the community interventions put out for bid by this city? Do you think there are limitations? What are they? And can we resolve them?
I think that the recommendation and some of the highlighted issues in the report were very important contributions to the issues around collaboration. When I ran a not-for-profit, I certainly saw a perspective that it was important to have collaborations with government before the contracting process or the RFP process moved ahead too far. Now, as the commissioner, I wanted, for example, in repurposing our employment programs, to be able to have consultations with communities. So we consulted with clients, we consulted with staff, we consulted with advocacy groups. But the procurement rules raise certain issues around consulting with potential vendors. And these rules are really important. They have to do with ensure that there's equal opportunity, ensuring that there's not an inside track to get contracts, and also, frankly, they came against a background of corruption. So the rules are really important. However, when I found ourselves in the position of developing these brand new programs, it would have been helpful to have another step before the concept papers, such as I think what the report is recommending, to have a more formal role for input from potential contractors before the concept paper. As it was when we issued our concept paper on the employment programs, I was really appreciated that Councilmember Levin gave us an opportunity at a public hearing to talk about some of the issues that were at work. And frankly, the responses to the concept paper were terrifically constructive, which is why we're about to issue the RFP now, but took some time to incorporate the concept. So I think the recommendation around a structure of consultation is actually a very helpful one to improve services and to really enhance the partnership between not-for-profits and government.
Our next panelist is Christine Quinn, the newly appointed president and CEO of WIN. Given the very significant challenge of these nonprofit service providers, are you concerned about our sectors and, for that matter, WIN's ability to make meaningful shifts to reduce homelessness?
So we have in New York, thanks to great lawyers like Steve Banks and other advocates, a requirement, right, that every person be housed. That is not negotiable, that is. Now, you could go about meeting that requirement in a number of ways. The City of New York, and I say this as somebody who used to consider herself part of the City of New York, could provide all that services. Not a way to go. You know what I'm saying? We all know that. Better to have providers do it. But that means we as providers are taking on a mandated by the courts role of the government of New York. The government in all of its levels needs to recognize the profound responsibility they have handed off. They need to define with the courts or the city council or the legislature, whomever, what that responsibility means, and then make good in making the fulfillment of that responsibility in more times than not possible. Going back to, and this is not a statement on any, one elected official or administration or anything, but if you go back and look forward, that probably never happened. We probably were more in a, okay, there's this requirement, let's take care of it, let's take care of it, let's take care of it, out of sight, out of mind, on to the next news cycle, which is often how government works. But homelessness is never, it may be out of sight, but trust me, if you're homeless, it's never out of mind. And we're, as Allison said, acting in this as if homelessness is an emergency crisis. It is an emergency crisis if you're homeless, but the reality of homelessness in New York is not an emergency in the sense that it's going away tomorrow. And we need to recognize and plan in a more long-term way and a more reality-based way on how we solve this. It's crazy to give any group or organizations contracts to do a service that will continue for a period of time, you don't know how long, without putting in escalation rates into that. It's also crazy to back into programs based on how much money you think you have. Right? If you look at a lot of the scattered site housing programs, they give us X amount for rent in our HUD contracts, right? X amount for rents. There is nowhere in the city of New York you are going to find an apartment for that rent. So what do we do at WIN? Look homeless people in the face and say, you're not getting an apartment? You take on apartments that cost more than you have money for, and you hope you'll make up the difference through going to companies and foundations and others and asking for money. But none of those groups want to fund what they see as mandated by the courts and others as the core requirement of government. But honestly, if we at WIN lived within the budget of the government, we would fail our clients. So you have to go beyond what you get, and then, as it is now, and find money in other places. That's not sustainable. And we have to just kind of admit the facts that all together, by requirement or by humanity, we bit off a huge piece. It's not more than we can chew because we have to deal with it, but the way we're structured, we are hoping for the best. But when we're dealing with people's lives, people who are in these positions because somebody or something failed on them, that's simply not fair. And if we apply just some simple, logical practices, like cost escalation, like building in more administrative overhead, like really looking at salaries. It's hard in the human services sector to compete with things like hospitals, who can pay caseworkers more. We need good caseworkers in hospitals. We could begin to come up with a clear plan of how to fix this. But you know, it's been said many times, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, and that's kind of what we've done in the relationship between governments and service providers in the homeless service area.
Well, David, you talked about exactly that same theme of it's very difficult to say no in the article in the Wall Street Journal this morning.
Yeah, and to Chris's point that this is a fixable problem, Paul and I were talking earlier at breakfast. Paul said, you know, was there ever a sort of golden age of human services where you had enough money to cover your costs? And the answer is yes. Actually, there was, and it wasn't that long ago. Allison and I were debating whether it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but there was a time when the funding was there to cover the costs of your program. At the Jewish Board, we start the year with an $18 million deficit. That is the gap between the cost of the services we provide and the reimbursement that we get from government. Now, we're lucky. We have support from UJA Federation. We raise $13 million a year. We have an investment portfolio that spins off $5 million a year, and we manage to fill the gap. But there are very few organizations that have those kinds of resources. And even at the level that we're doing it at the Jewish Board, there are lots of things we would like to do that we can't do. There are investments in business intelligence systems. There are data and outcomes work. There are innovative pilot projects that we would like to do that we can't do because when we go to a foundation or a corporation or an individual, our first ask has to be, can you please help fill the gap left by government funding? And I do want to say right off the bat that nothing that we say is meant to be a personal affront to Steve Banks or Paul Francis, because you will not find two better partners in government than these two people.
So, Paul, let me ask a follow-up question to David's point. Do you ever see us getting back to the golden age or a new golden age, and what would that look like?
Some of the factors to get back to the golden age are straightforward and simply involve higher funding levels, escalators, or I do think the indirect cost is something we could discuss more specifically. But what we also need to do is look at the underlying problems in these programs. There are redundant regulations. There are deeply redundant audits. I come from the private sector. Unlike Steve and I were a year apart at NYU Law School, and we took very different paths. Steve did wonderful things, and I went to Wall Street. I became a corporate lawyer and then a businessman. And one of my observations about government is that it over-engineers against risk in a way that the private sector just doesn't do. And I think that we really, Steve Goldsmith, when he was in the city, said to me once that so much of what we have in New York in our architecture of managing contracts it's like it's a carryover from the days of Tammany Hall. Because the embarrassment, political cost of embarrassment is so high, we over-engineer against risk. And I think we need to get at those underlying problems as a indispensable element to getting back to the golden age.
Can I just, and I want to just take a second to obviously echo what David said, but also commend both Steve and Paul, because these issues are beginning to be looked at. For homeless shelters, there's been much, press and debate about the quality of shelters. And that's a good thing because we want them to be the best they can. But we, in shelters in New York City, are inspected by something like 7 or 8 city agencies and at least one, sometimes more, state agency. Every time one of those inspectors comes, no other work really happens, right? You can imagine. And being regulations, every inspector interprets them differently, and so you end up confused. Now, I'm in no way saying reduce the standards, but you coordinate inspections, you're going to save nonprofits like WIN money because we're going to not be chasing around every inspector, and you're also going to open up resources through that kind of efficiency through government. It's complicated, but I really do want to applaud Steve and Paul, who are already beginning to take that challenge on and other ones like it.
What can government do to really help boards and staff start to develop the discipline and say, yes, we care about individuals, neighborhoods, and communities, but we also care about the long-term viability because we need to think about, as Chris was saying, long-term strategy. So how can they help us to really be much more operating in a business mode when it comes to making these tough decisions?
Well, I do think that one of the points of the report that we agree with is that the indirect cost in contracts makes it very challenging for organizations to invest in the type of systems that they need to manage risk and also to compete in areas like Medicaid, managed care that is part of the future of healthcare. There are some great you should read the appendices of the report because there are some great documents in there in terms of KPIs and various measures of risk. We have numerous state agencies that have slightly different risk measures that look at balance sheet items. So I don't think that it's hard to find what the key metrics are that you would look for. But what Gordon didn't say, I was also the chief financial officer of Ann Taylor Stores about 20 years ago, and then the first CFO of Priceline. Both those companies have gone on to do extraordinary things, but each of them hit a real air bump because they were growing very fast and they hit an air bump. And I think the biggest risk is the contract that you expect to get and it doesn't come through, the recoupment of funds that you didn't see coming. And so I think we should be careful not to overemphasize the systemic part of this, because at the end of the day, I think it's the judgment and the kind of risk aversion of management that you really need to really avoid risk, to really manage risk.
Steve?
I think that Paul's point is really an important one, as is Chris's earlier one. I think the point about managing risk is in part how we contract and how we fund and so forth, but also how each organization evaluates its contracts. And what some of the contracting process that we observe post-FEGS, FEGS, we shouldn't generalize, but on the other hand, it's got a lot of important lessons to it. And when I got involved with the FEGS situation, it read a lot like the situation that I inherited at the Legal Aid Society. And there were a lot of flags within the organization that one could see. And I saw them because I had been through this in a not-for-profit, and how they were missed, not going to render any judgments on it. But I think that that's an important thing that goes along with this. Not every contract is a contract that every organization can perform on, even when we address some of the issues that we have been talking about. And I think, what the board of the Legal Aid Society ultimately did in rebuilding it with the management was to set up a series of, I think, model business practices in terms of running a not-for-profit. And they were hard. I can say that as the person running the organization. They were hard to introduce, and it was really difficult to introduce them. But they were introduced and saved an organization that otherwise would have gone the route of FEGS. So I think that third, leg of the stool is a really important one to look at in terms of what is the governance of one's organization and how does that mitigate risk. Having said that, I think the points that Chris made too about, this is a good moment. You do have city and state officials who know how to work together and are committed to looking at this on this particular panel.
And I think Steve's point is
important.
a really important one, and this is something that I'm really proud of, that it wasn't just we need more money, we need to enhance the partnership, but also, as Allison said, we need to look ourselves in the mirror, what can and should we do differently. Okay, Chris, quickly, and then I want to move.
And I want to kind of for a second emphasize that part about what we need to do as the sector. And obviously, whatever we can do to build in to make the risks clearer is a good thing. But as Steve, I think, kind of alluded to, some of the risks are pretty clear, right? When you look at a contract, you know to some degree how risky it is for your organization or not. And there's this feeling, I think, out there that if you don't say yes to every time government reaches out to you in one way or another, you'll never be asked to the party again. And we just have to get over that. Part of what we're doing here, right, is working with human beings, helping them in different ways become their best selves and get out of the levels of victimization that they're in. We have to do that too. We have the power to say no to government. This doesn't work. We also have the power, any of us who are staff at nonprofits in a management role, to pick up the phone and call Commissioner Banks or call Paul Francis or call whomever and say, we just got this email from such and such agency, Deputy Huff or whatever, and it's the dumbest idea I've ever heard, and we're not going to do it. And you should change it. But we don't do that enough because we're so fearful that we're going to lose our money. And we need to get over that ourselves because that's the only way. Partnership isn't just on these two guys. It's a two-way street, and we haven't been in it enough. We've taken on a subservient posture, and we need to get over it.
It's not just that we're fearful, we're also passionate. We want to do the work.
Yes.
That's all right. As you said, we'll figure it out. We'll give you an apartment. We'll get you housed. We'll figure it out. We said no to maybe our first contract ever 6 months ago. You could not believe the reaction within my organization. Oh my God, you did what? You told them no, you wouldn't do it, you needed more money? But I have to tell you, it worked. They came back to us and they said, okay, we're going to put a little more money into the contract.
So on the question of risk management and the partnership, I wanted to say that in addition to being passionate, I find that people in the sector, leaders in the sector, are also very polite, and so I'm really happy to see the trend is turning here. Those days are gone, so no problem there. But I also wanted to say that I am so glad that ABNY is a part of this morning's panel because many people from the business community were so happy they volunteer their time and their energy to serve on boards. And so boards play an important role in this as well in terms of risk management. It's a delicate balance because as board members, you're expected to be cheerleaders, and that's important, but you also have to be realistic. And I think, I'm not a fan of micromanagement by any means, but on the question of some contracts that are questionable in terms of whether they make sense for the organization, boards need to step up too and be a part of that decision.
So with that, our fourth panelist is Pat Swan, who's the Senior Program Officer of the New York Community Trust. Pat's grant-making responsibilities covers the areas of community development, civic affairs, and technical assistance. She's a board member of Philanthropy New York and serves as an advisory board member of Brooklyn Workforce Innovations and the New York City office of LISC. How do we address the potential impact on service levels possibly going down if additional dollars are not brought to the table, or can they be?
I love this question. So every foundation should include reasonable overhead cost in every grant, whether it's general operating support or a project-specific grant. That should just be a given. In addition, there are a few foundations. Mine is one. I see my colleague Doug Bauer from Clark Estates Foundation is another that support over and above that basic understanding of overhead, paying the rent, having furniture, over and above that, we also invest in what we call nonprofit capacity building. And that means investing in the sector, in the infrastructure of the sector. It means investing in things like technology infrastructure. It means investing in professional development for staff and board. It means giving an organization, as David said, an opportunity to do something in terms of evaluation and tracking outcome. These things are expensive, and they are never included in the standard government definition of overhead. So we think it's very important to invest in those things as well. I hope that there are more foundations as a result of this report who share that commitment. But I also want to address two assumptions that I think are embedded in that question. One thing is scale, but the other thing I'll talk about first, and that's the assumption that it's a zero-sum game, that there's a finite pie. I know that the prevailing political winds in Albany and across the country are that it is a zero-sum game, that the pie is fixed. But if you look around, you'll see, especially in this town, that there's economic value being created all the time. In fact, we have a tradition in New York City of generating new economic value. And everybody's a part of that. Builders, developers, big businesses, small businesses, people like me who just get up, go to work, and then spend our money. We're all a part of generating that economic value. I think as New Yorkers, our challenge is to figure out how to make that value benefit all of us. And I think this is what our mayor talks about when he says he wants to help fix income inequality. So that's one point I'd like to make. The zero-sum game, I know, is a mindset that's very fixed and hard to get out of, but I would like for us to think a little bit more expansively about that. And then the second issue is scale. Foundation money is a flea. Government spending is an elephant. Just take one agency, the New York City Department of Education. The budget for the New York City Department of Education is $23 billion. Education is a favorite charitable cause for extremely wealthy individuals like Bill Gates and for other, less prominent but also generous philanthropists. But if you take all the money that's invested in charter schools and all the foundation grants for after-school programs and arts education and all of the school-based initiatives that foundations support, and it's a flea on the backside of a $23 billion budget. There is no way that foundation money or philanthropy in general is going to be able to fill a gap in government support for direct basic human services that many people assume may be the result of a more responsibility shared in terms of covering overhead expenses.
So even though philanthropy might be a flea, it's a very important flea, as we all know. So.
Fleas can, they can nudge, they can annoy, they can sometimes inject money in places where money needs to be injected. Fleas can be really important, but
And, if you want to have a really short fundraising call one day, go to somebody like Pat and say, here's what I want you to fund. government pays me 90 cents to do $1's worth of work. Would you please pay that other 10 cents? That fundraising call will be over as fast as you can imagine. It is the least important thing that people want to fund. So your point is absolutely right. This has to be a government solution to a government problem.
So David, now having the distinction of running the largest human service agency, probably in the city, for that matter, the country, can you shed some light on some of your short-term and long-term viability concerns going forward?
My wife will tell you I slept 4 hours last night, and so that's a typical night for a CEO of a nonprofit. I mentioned at the beginning the fundraising gap that we start every year with. That's true for every single one of my colleagues in the human services field. And it's a very difficult 8-ball to be behind, and it really prevents you from doing a lot of things that you want to do. It also means that you unfortunately have to balance your budget by doing things you don't want to do, like underpaying your staff, understaffing programs, not maintaining buildings to the level that you really want to. So it's a very difficult situation. And, you know, government contracts all sorts of things. Government has decided that they're not very good at building bridges, for example, and they'll hire a company to build a bridge. And if it costs $40 million to build a bridge, they don't say, hey, we're going to pay you $35 million and we're going to expect you to find the other $5 million. But that's what we have allowed happen in the nonprofit human services sector. And it is because we're fearful, we're passionate, we care about the clients that we serve, but it isn't sustainable over the long run.
Just like constructing a house requires different types of materials, when you want to construct well-being, you need to have different types of materials. You have to have community supports and resources. You need to have social interconnectedness and certain interventions. And so in New York, those materials for building well-being are provided by nonprofit organizations.
Human services is all of those things that we need as individuals to be successful, to thrive, to be comfortable, to feel supported. For a lot of folks, they need those supports, that they don't have them. They don't have access in their daily lives, and they need organizations like Goodwill and other nonprofits to make sure that those things are available to them. Goodwill has a long history of working with people with disabilities. People with disabilities have about a 20% plus unemployment rate. And so one of the things that we try and do is to help employers understand that this is a very important group of people that they should think about employing.
Well, Children's Aid Society is a social service organization that's committed to helping young people be successful. And here at this particular site, we're committed to making sure that the young people are not on the pipeline to prison, but on the pipeline to college by starting with our early childhood room with kids aged 2.5 and providing services and supports all the way through high school to make sure that our young people go off to college.
College application from a young man who talked about that his father was named Milbank, and he's referring to the Milbank Center and what it gave him and how attached he is and what it taught. It, in essence, replaced the role that a father would have in his life.
Goodwill and Children's Aid Society are members of the Human Services Council, and there are two organizations that are of 170 of our members. So we have a very robust reach across New York City. If the sector had more money, they could take more risks, they could be more entrepreneurial in their thinking, and they could think more strategically. Right now, they're operating in emergency management mode on a regular basis. And so we organized a commission, and we took a look at what are the financial factors, what are the relationship with government, what's the oversight mechanisms that we have in place, what is the overall model for the nonprofit, and what is broken about it. And we've come up with a set of solid recommendations that we think is a way forward. We think that the sector absolutely can survive and can do really well, but there's some serious changes that need to happen if we're going to be able to continue to contribute to communities going forward.